I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1855 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In this episode, I'm going to bring you a profound story from none other than Southern Pines, North Carolina. If you ever spent any time at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, you know exactly where Southern Pines is, along with Pinehurst and Aberdeen, North Carolina, right over on the western edge of the Fort Bragg Reservation. Those towns are also not too far from Harmony Church. I've never been to Harmony Church, but I remember on every map of the reservation of Fort Bragg, as I would study it, looking for where I was going to lead my infantry platoon there in 3rd at the 325 Infantry of the 82nd Airborne Division, I would see Harmony Church over on the western edge of the reservation and think, that must have been a nice place, especially if they put it on all our tactical maps of the reservation. Anyway, over there on the western edge of Fort Bragg, it was a beautiful area. Had lots of beautiful golf courses over there. A lot of people would retire there. There's a story that appeared in the Pilot newspaper over there in Southern Pines, North Carolina, that grabbed my attention for numerous reasons, in addition to being located in one of the most beautiful areas of this great nation. The primary reason the story grabbed my attention is because it was written by another tremendous representative of that Vietnam veteran generation, one as great as any that ever heeded the call of duty from its country. This particular Vietnam veteran is Don Tortorice. He is a former attorney and professor at the law school of the College of William and Mary. He's also written several books. He did a great job on writing this article. I always admire people who are good writers, people who can pick the right words and put them in the right sequence to grab your soul as you read what they wrote. Don Tortorice is one of those writers, as you will soon see when I share his story with you. The story has to do with time and the toll it's taking on the Vietnam veterans. He is presenting some very sobering numbers for all Vietnam veterans. Most of us Vietnam veterans are aware that we are getting a little long in the tooth. Most of us can accurately state that our experiences in Vietnam, when we talk about them, occurred 50 years ago. To all Vietnam veterans, I know this hits home. When we were young, in our late teens and early 20s, we would listen to the old folks talk about things that happened 50 years before. We would think, I can't believe it. You're as old as Methuselah. You should be in a museum. Nobody can remember back that far. Lo and behold, today, we have discovered we can easily remember back that far, 50 years plus. So with that in mind, let's take a look at Professor Don Tortorice's story that appeared in the Pilot newspaper right there in Southern Pines, North Carolina. He wrote a column for that paper. The title of it is, Time Can Make Us Forget, but Vietnam's Toll Remains. Again, the story was submitted by Mr. Don Tortorice, a columnist for the Pilot, right there in Southern Pines, not far from where he lives today in Pinehurst. Dateline, Southern Pines, North Carolina. Have you noticed that the accumulated passage of time seems to sneak up on us, then all of a sudden we become older than we think we are? Now, those of us who served in country, a phrase unfamiliar to those who did not, find our memory of service in Vietnam something akin to a walk through history. That's right. We walked right through the middle of history back in those times. Continuing. I recently read a fascinating collection of data in the New York Times by Charles Thomason of the Thompson-Nelson Group that was captivating. I share some of it below. Here's one that always makes my blood pressure rise. A statistic not included is the number of people who claim to have served in the Republic of Vietnam. That number is 3 to 4 times the 3 million who actually did. One of those who falsely claimed they served in Vietnam was none other than the highly respected Senator Richard Blumenthal from the great state of Connecticut. To be honest with you, I don't see how the people up there in that state can have such a lying SOB serve as one of their senators. Pardon me, but stolen valor drives me up the wall. Continuing with the story. In case you have not been paying attention these past few decades, after you return from Vietnam, the clock has been ticking. You better believe it's been ticking. Of the 2,709,918 Americans who served in Vietnam, Thompson writes, less than 850,000 are estimated to be alive today, with the youngest American Vietnam veteran's age approximately to be 60 years old. So, if you are a legitimate Vietnam veteran and you're alive and reading this, how does it feel to be among the last third of all U.S. veterans who served in Vietnam? I don't know about you guys, but this gives me the chills, considering this is the kind of information I'm used to reading about World War II and Korean War vets. That's right, Don, we're getting on up there in age. Don continues with this. Some other figures about individuals in uniform who served in Vietnam. Some of these will surprise you. 9,087,000 military personnel served on active duty during the Vietnam War. 8,744,000 GIs were on active duty during the war from August the 5th, 1964 through March the 28th, 1973. 2,709,918 Americans served in Vietnam. This number represents 9.7% of their generation. That means almost 1 in 10 of everyone in that generation served in Vietnam. 3,403,100, including 514,000 offshore personnel, served in the broader Southeast Asia theater. That includes Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, flight crews based in Thailand, and sailors in adjacent South China Sea waters. That means the Blue Water Navy. 2,594,000 personnel served within the borders of South Vietnam from January the 1st, 65 through March the 28th, 1973. Another 50,000 men served in Vietnam between 1960 and 1964. Those were the good old days, back in the early 60s. I call them the Wild West days. Then the military went there in numbers, and by 1967 and 68, they actually started having IG inspections over there. I always thought that was ridiculous. When I'd receive all those inspection results and get chewed out by the commanders because we didn't have all our I's dotted and T's crossed, I would say, look, we're trying to fight a war here, not pass inspections. Unfortunately, that never carried much weight with the commanders. Continuing. Of the 2.6 million, between 1 and 1.6 million, that's 40 to 60%, either fought in combat, provided close support, or were at least fairly regularly exposed to enemy attack. I think they made a mistake on that one. I believe when you set foot on the country of Vietnam, you were exposed to enemy attack. They were everywhere over there. That was only my opinion. Continuing. 7,484 women served in Vietnam. Of that, 6,250, or 83.5%, were nurses. 8 of those nurses died in country. 1 was killed in action. I'd like to add a comment here. I appreciate so much those women who went over to Vietnam to serve, mainly as nurses. They were a wonderful group of people, and they did a great job over there, and I, for one, appreciate it more than I can express. Continuing. Peak troop strength in Vietnam was 543,482 on April the 30th of 1968. Believe it or not, about that time, William Westmoreland wanted another 500,000 troops over there. LBJ said, enough is enough. Continuing. Agent Orange, a hot topic and a big part of the Vietnam War history. Agent Orange is taking a huge toll on Vietnam veterans, with most deaths somehow related to exposure to the defoliant. No one officially dies from Agent Orange. They die from the exposures which cause heart and organ failure, cancers, and lung disorders. So many Vietnam veterans have died from these diseases that were caused by exposure to Agent Orange. It was a terrible thing. Talk about making bonehead decisions. It's easy to say that 50 years after it happened, but back in 1962, when they were considering the use of this high-powered weed killer, they knew that exposure to it could cause some people to get sick. They sat down and put it on the decision scales, and they put the dangers of diseases on one side and the benefits derived from the use of these defoliants on the other side, and apparently that side won out. They probably figured if a few people get sick from being exposed to these herbicides, we'll just take care of them, and the benefits derived from their use will greatly outweigh that. Unfortunately, in my humble opinion, somebody really made a big mistake back there. Continuing. The first man to die in Vietnam was James Davis in 1958. He was with the 509th Radio Research Station. Davis Station in Saigon was named for him. In terms of deaths attributed to hostilities, that figure stands at 47,378. Non-hostility-related deaths are 10,800. 61% of the men killed were 21 or younger. Of those killed, 17,539 were married. 5 men killed in Vietnam were only 16 years old. The oldest man killed was 62 years old. West Virginia, as a state, saw the highest proportion of fatalities among its residents. More than 303,700 were wounded. Of that, 75,000 were severely disabled, and about a third of those were 100% disabled. Amputation or crippling wounds to the lower extremities were 300% higher than in World War II and 70% higher than Korea. Those VC and NVA were real good at utilizing landmines and booby traps to hurt the Americans and their allies. There are 2,338 considered to be missing in action. Prisoners of war total 766, and 114 died in captivity. As for race and ethnicity, 88.4% of the men who served in Vietnam were Caucasian, and 10.6% were black. The vast majority of those who died, 86.3%, were Caucasian. That includes Hispanics. 12.5% were black. 1.2% belonged to other races. 170,000 Hispanics served in Vietnam. 3,070 died there. They don't say how many Aleutians served there. All those Native Americans from Alaska did quite well in Vietnam. We should be very proud of them. On the matter of winning or losing the war, 82% of veterans who saw heavy combat strongly believe the war was lost because of lack of political will. Nearly 75% of the public agrees it was a failure of political will, not of arms. I would agree with that. I also hold a very unpopular view about who won that war. I maintain we won it. I say that because what was the reason that made us go to Vietnam? To stop the spread of communism. Well, let me ask you this. Is there a USSR today? Has communist China become nothing more than a Walmart supplier? Are there any other dominant communist countries in the world? No. We, in fact, accomplished our mission when we went to Vietnam. When we left, the whole country of Vietnam was totally destroyed. We had done that with Operation Linebacker and other things. The nation was like a person on his deathbed. The USSR was their primary supporter, and they could not let them fail. They had to go in and support their proxy who had shed all that blood on their behalf. They spent billions of dollars rehabilitating Vietnam. And guess what happened just a few years later? They went broke. The Berlin Wall came down. USSR dissolved. In my estimation, we won. Moving on from that statement. Here's a point that Don brings up in his column that makes you feel good. He states, 91% of Vietnam War veterans and 90% of those who saw heavy combat are proud to have served their country over there. And here's the kicker. 74% of Vietnam veterans say they would serve again, even knowing the outcome. When you hear that, it gives me goosebumps, knowing that 90% of the Vietnam veterans are proud they served in that war, and 74% of them, including myself, would go back again, even knowing the outcome. I appreciate so much Vietnam veteran Don Tortorice for writing this column. I believe it is profound and it puts a lot of things into perspective. We need to do that every once in a while, and I thank Don so much for doing it. Speaking of Don Tortorice, I would encourage you to go over to the podcast website, VietnamVeteranNews.com, episode 1855. There you will see a picture of Don Tortorice today as he is enjoying his retirement over there in beautiful Pinehurst, North Carolina. Matter of fact, if you are in the area, just off the western edge of the Fort Bragg Reservation, and you run into Don at maybe Scott's Table Restaurant there in town, shake his hand and thank him for his service to his country, not only in Vietnam, but also after he came home. He was a college professor, an attorney, and a writer. Don Tortorice is a tremendous representative of the great Vietnam veteran generation. Don, thank you very much for your service. Matter of fact, I appreciate it so much, I am hereby issuing you an official Vietnam Veteran News podcast salute for your service to your country. Thank you very much, sir. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1855 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen to this program. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more that will be coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?